Hey, I'm Cairo Gashuro, and welcome to Let It Rip. We're coming to you from the CUNY TV studios in the shadow of the Empire State Building in New York City. Now, recently, Vice President Kamala Harris became the first woman of color to accept the Democratic Party's nomination for president. During her acceptance speech, Vice President Harris not only highlighted why Donald Trump would be a terrible president, but she also outlined her vision for the country. Now, while many celebrated Vice President Harris's historic nomination, she is not only in a very tight presidential race, but she has also been the target of both racist and sexist attacks, which have made the race even more challenging. Now, here to help us understand the impact of Vice President Harris's presidential run are New York State Assembly member Latrice Walker, Bronx Borough President Vanessa Gibson, and journalist Malika Jabali. I'm Kerry Ashuro, and this is Let It Rip. Latrice, I want to start with you. What's your take on Vice President Kamala Harris's presidential run?
Well, my perspective comes as a Black woman, as an attorney, as a member of the New York State Assembly. I'm also the chair of the Election Law Committee. I am the secretary to the New York State Democratic Party. I was a presidential delegate for Vice President Kamala Harris, and after she wins the general election, I have the proud opportunity to be a presidential elector. And so being a member of the Electoral College, it just feels like I am my ancestors' wildest dream. Mm-hmm. It's always important to be able to see what you can be. And I think that having superstar women that I was able to look up to as a young girl, I'm inspired by what young girls are able to see as the president of the United States being a woman of color. My own daughter wants to be president of the United States simply because she's able to see women like Letitia James be the New York State Attorney General and Congresswoman Yvette Clarke down in Washington, D.C., and of course her own mom and her auntie, Vanessa Gibson, as the Bronx Borough President. And so this is a moment that has taken far too long. We know that women in this country have had the right to vote since 1920, but Black women have only enjoyed that right since 1965. Right. And so, you know, here we are, it is our time, and we know that when we fight, we win.
Okay. Vanessa, same question for you.
It's a moment of inspiration. It is encouraging. It is uplifting. It is motivating. It's what wakes us up every day. As women on the front lines, we have been ignored for far too long. I'm excited. And just like Assemblywoman Latrice Walker said, I also am a presidential electorate. I was delegate for the DNC. I was excited to be in Chicago a few weeks ago. I am just excited and thrilled at what lies ahead. This is a defining moment for America where we have to really stand by our values, our democracy, what's important to us. And seeing Vice President Kamala Harris rise to be the Democratic nominee for president is really our hope for a better tomorrow. And as I watch her travel the United States and speak and just see children looking at her just inspired, right? You cannot be what you cannot see. But one thing I appreciate about Kamala is that she talks about her record of accomplishment as an attorney, as a prosecutor, as a district attorney, as a United States senator, as vice president. She doesn't talk about being an African-American, Southeast Asian woman. She doesn't allow anyone to just put her in that box. She focuses on what matters to the American people. And I think that's important to stick to the points, because you've seen the rhetoric, you've seen the racist comments, the sexist comments that she's being thrown at her. That happens to both the Assemblywoman and I all the time. Okay. But you have to stay focused on what matters and what people care about.
All right, great. Malika, I want to come to you. What are your thoughts, or what are you hearing on the ground? And I know that you've written quite a bit about Vice President Kamala Harris. I'm curious to hear what you're hearing on the ground.
Well, first off, I want to address your question too, because I want to say that representation does matter to a lot of people, and her presidency is very exciting for a lot of folks. I think on the ground in Wisconsin, you are frankly going to hear a bit of a mixed bag. As somebody from Atlanta, where I've had the luxury of seeing Black people in power all of my life, I've seen Black mayors, I've seen Black fire chiefs, and dentists and doctors and principals and lawyers. I know how much it matters to our people. It has mattered to me. I can't take that for granted. And having that kind of environment, being able to have Black people in power who are successful, it allows you to realize that anything is possible. There's no limit to our potential as a people. At the same time, and you know me, I'm an at the same time person.
Right.
I would myself, if I didn't give this caveat,
Uh-huh.
when you are representing America in the highest office in the land, you are also bound to what it means to be capitalist and imperialist and representing that system. And so when you look at what has happened to Black people in a state like Wisconsin, where the incarceration rate is the highest for Black people anywhere in the country, where the policing has 40% of the budget in this city, in the city of Milwaukee, the most populous city in the state, you see what happens when you are following that kind of machine. And unfortunately, Vice President Harris isn't just an operative in it, she runs it. She's embracing it. She's called herself a top cop. And in the middle of these vast mass protests against police, the largest police protests, anti-police violence that we've had in the history of America, they ran on a tough on crime administration. They have allowed COVID funds to be used to increase funding for police, not decrease it.
All right, thank you, Malaika. Latrice, I want to come to you because one of the, and I think Malaika mentioned a really great point, was this idea of top cop, right? That was something that was an albatross the last time she ran for president, and she dropped out really early in the race. But that doesn't seem to be a negative that is impeding her run now. What are your thoughts?
Well, I am a huge proponent of criminal justice reform here in the state of New York and quite frankly across the country. I haven't been the sponsor of the bail reform bill and a number of discovery reforms. And so through that perspective, I also was told when I got elected that 25,000 people were returning home to my district from the upstate criminal justice system. One of the things that I've done as chair of election law was to help usher through the restoration of the right to vote for people who are on parole. And we're also trying to take away some of the barriers from folk who are on Rikers Island presently or in pretrial detention to encourage them to have the ability to vote.
Okay.
But when we were in the convention, we heard a lot of rhetoric around the prosecutor versus the felon. And at the same time, there were individuals telling us that we need to go into the barbershops and the beauty salons and in the communities and inner cities to be able to inspire people to come out to vote. And I'm like, well, what is the message? And so I believe that we have to straddle it's a slippery slope in terms of making sure that people are safe, because we all want to be safe. But we don't believe that public safety should come as an impediment to people enjoying constitutional rights. And so I do believe that we have to be very careful around the messaging that we're giving to folk, because we do want those 25,000 people to come out to vote. We do want all of those individuals in Milwaukee that Sister Malaika just mentioned to come out to vote. And so, you know, it's an interesting set of dynamics.
It's an interesting point, but what do you think? Is this the best time to raise that analysis and say, look, you know, she's a top cop, she's prosecuted folks, and then on the other hand, you have her opponent who's, you know, been convicted of felons?
I think it's a very important conversation, and of course it's on the table as we are preparing for the November election, and her past is her present. Her record is her record, but I also think it allows her a chance to talk about her past, but also reflect on what that means for her as a candidate and how we move forward. There is a deep history rooted in the criminal justice system that has not always been fair to African Americans across this country, right? And so we have to acknowledge that pain that we experience every single day, even now in America when you talk about policing. We all deserve to be safe. Public safety, to me, is a fundamental right that everyone should be afforded, regardless of where you live. But one of the things that we have done in the city of New York is we've tried to look at policing in a different light, from a holistic approach, bringing on anti-gun violence organizations, organizations, incredible messengers and trusted partners, and going into these same communities where we've harmed them and turned that wrong into a right. Looking at programs, recreation, education, jobs, career pathways. Why is it that the communities that are most policed also less resourced, right? And so that is a challenge for us. And I think Kamala, as our presidential candidate, has to really talk about that across America, because there are some places where they want more police presence and many others where they don't because they want more programs.
You know, it's interesting that you say that, because the safest communities have the most resources. And we think it's an important time for Vice President Harris to be able to get to policy, right? And for the most part, people who are engaged in crime, it's a poverty issue. And so we appreciate the tax credits that she's proposing for families. We appreciate all of the resources that she's going to be bringing to housing, to give people an opportunity for first-time home buyers, for people to stay into their homes. And so it's an incredible time to talk about the fact that criminal justice within our system have deep-rooted issues and other societal and environmental ills, and those are the things that she's going to be focusing on addressing.
But Malika, when we think about the Democratic Party, you know, you look across the country and it's Democrats that are initially initiating cop cities all over the place. We're going to have one here in New York. There's one being built in Atlanta. What are your thoughts on that in terms of the whole reformist approach to criminal justice?
I think it would be helpful. You know, I'm not a Democratic Party insider, so I don't know what other conversations Vice President Harris has been having about criminal justice reform. But as of today, she still does not have an issues page up on her campaign website. So she can say things in campaign speeches, but what will her policies be? And if you look at her record, she's had a mixed bag when it comes to police violence, but we can very clearly see where all the money has gone to increase police funding. The prosecutor, she's very familiar, I'm sure he is, with the role of Fani Willis, where on one hand, yes, they are convicting Donald Trump, and it happened in my state of Georgia during a Beyonce concert, mind you, so it was a little bit of poetic justice when she announced.
But do you think in terms of Trump, I mean, some people would say the First Step Act was from his administration, and some would look at that as a positive. You know, do you think there's any critique to be had about Trump and his approach to criminal justice?
I mean, of course there is. We saw how he was with the big operator 5. You know, we were trying to reframe the narrative there. So yes, we know that he has had that kind of history of calling for the death penalty, pulling out a full-page ad on young brothers and sisters in you all state of New York City. So of course, there is a critique of how he is with criminal justice. But what I wanted to get at is the fact that, yes, Fani prosecuting Donald Trump, but at the same time, she used that same law to prosecute a bunch of activists and people who are just coming in to visit Atlanta through a conspiracy, through RICO charges. So on one hand, we have this system that we know can get criminals, can get rapists, and can get abusers, but are we using that same purview, that same power to make sure that police are held accountable? Are we using that power for a surveillance state? Are we using that power to call Black Lives Matter activists extremists? And we have under this administration. So when you are looking at who's being charged and convicted under this system, it's not just those in power, but it is also working class people who look like us.
Great conversation, but we have to end it there. I want to thank our guests, New York State Assembly Member Latrice Walker, Bronx Borough President Vanessa Gibson, and journalist Malika Jabali. When we come back, we'll take a look at immigration. Specifically, we'll examine a trip by a delegation from the New York State Legislature to appreciate the tensions between the Dominican Republic and Haiti and what those tensions mean for both countries. I'm Kerry Gashoro, and this is Let It Rip. Now, while migration remains a hotly contested issue in the United States, we wanted to take a moment to highlight a recent trip by a delegation from the New York State Legislature to the Dominican Republic, whose purpose was to foster a better economic and political relationship between the Dominican Republic and New York State. Additionally, the delegation also had a chance to see the rising tension between Haiti and the Dominican Republic due to ongoing political strife. Now, here to help us talk about the trip and to help us understand what is going on between the two countries are New York State Senator Luis Sepúlveda and Professor Sophie Maríñez from the Graduate Center and the Borough of Manhattan Community College. Let's start with you, Senator. Tell us a little bit about the trip and what you were able to accomplish during the trip.
Well, we started these delegation trips 3 years ago. We started with 5 elected officials. Last year we had 19, and this year We had 61 total individuals, including judges, members of the Assembly, New York State Senate, and City Council. Part of what we do is we try to foster long-lasting relationships between the community, the political leadership, the business leadership in the Dominican Republic with the New York State Legislature. We've had very historic trips in the last couple of years. We had the entire Supreme Court, or their version of the Supreme Court, which is called the Constitutional Court of the Dominican Republic. The chief judge and the entire, all the magistrates came here to the New York State Senate, did a presentation. We've exchanged over 30 senators between New York and the Dominican Republic. We've had multiple visits with the president of the Dominican Republic. We've had exchanges with the business community. So it's really to create these long-lasting relationships and links between both governments. And we've seen great things have come from it. We've also visited Haiti as part of our delegation trip, and we saw things there that normally there's a misconception about what happens to the Haitian community.
So before we kind of get into the relation between the Dominican Republic and Haiti, one of the things is that you're dual citizen with the Dominican Republic. You know, how does that, the dual citizenship play into how you're understanding and fostering relationships between the Dominican Republic and New York State?
Well, being a dual, I mean, my parents are from Puerto Rico, so I'm Puerto Rican by birth.
Okay.
Parents, I was born in the country of Brooklyn, but
Right.
but almost 2.5 years ago, the president of the Dominican Republic granted me citizenship by decree. So I'm also a very proud Dominican citizen. And that's helped me open doors because some of the access things that I have as a citizen other people don't have, I'm able to go there and do things that others may not be able to do. But I've had the opportunity to visit that country so many times that I'm able to see the development of the country. I'm able to see that the Dominican Republic is the best place to invest money in the Caribbean. You know, European American Bank has said that, the World Bank has said that, because there's this perception that economically they're like a banana republic. When the reality is that when you go there, you see malls that are equivalent to any malls you see here. You see high fashion stores. Of course, there's poverty, and of course, there's an unequal distribution of wealth. But the country is a country that is great for investors, and it's great for people to go and visit. The tourism there is fantastic. Okay. And so there's a lot to see and a lot to do, and that's what we do with the delegation trip.
Professor Maríñez, I want to come to you. We know that women's rights has been an ongoing issue in the Dominican Republic. Just wanted to get your take on a little bit of that and what your thoughts are on it.
Well, I see everything connected. Women's rights and immigration and businesses, economic development, everything is connected. So in terms of women's reproductive rights, the law in the Dominican Republic bans abortion under all circumstances. That is a law that harks back to the 19th century. And there have been a lot of push by Afro-feminists and feminist movements in general to overturn that, to allow at least exceptions, what they call the 3 exceptions, right, for health, the life, and rape reasons. So, but the way I see this is that this law against abortion targets disproportionately Black women and poor women, because the daughters and wives and women of a higher status who can afford abortion, they can do it either in the country, in private clinics, or they travel abroad. The poor women are the ones who get disproportionately affected by this law.
Okay. Senator, what are your thoughts on that? Is there a sense that you know, the legislature there is trying to make progress in addressing some of the concerns that were raised by the professor?
Well, I'm sure, man, I've seen myself that there's an attempt to resolve some of these issues. In fact, the co-sponsor of my delegation is Amanda Septimo, an assemblywoman here from the Bronx, who's very, very much in tune with what they call tres causales, which is the 3 issues that she spoke about. But there has been progress, and there has been progress in terms of the movement, women's movement in the Dominican Republic. You have a lot of ministers that are females. There's a provision in the government that every governor, every province has a governor. Every single one of those governors is a female. That's something that the president of the country, you don't see that in very many places. And you're seeing that there's a movement to clear some of these issues with the tres causales. And the president's family are in favor of it. But it's going to take time, and the reason, part of the reason is because the Catholic Church has a stronghold. such a strong stronghold in the Dominican Republic that's part of the reason why some of the investment at the speed that some of us would like has occurred.
So one of the issues that the professor raised is this idea that Afro-Latinas are, they experience disparity at higher rates than the other women. And we also know that there's been ongoing tensions between the Dominican Republic and Haiti, and I know you got to visit the border.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about your experience and why there's that tension between the two countries?
Well, some people try to the narrative is it's based on color, which is inaccurate because over 80% of the Dominican population is of African descent as well. It's in their DNA. Part of it is also a perception issue. Look, when we visit the border, you'll see the schools that are near the borders on the Dominican Republic side, where you have over 45 to 50% of the students there are of Haitian descent. Some of the hospitals in the labor department, labor and delivery, where over 60% of the women that are in labor are women from Haiti. The government of the Dominican Republic educates the Haitian children no matter where they come from. The problem with Haiti is not the Dominican Republic. The Dominican Republic is a relatively poorer country. It can't expend its resources on Haiti as well. The problem is that the international community hasn't invested enough in Haiti in the infrastructure. The problem is that, look for what's happened in the United States.
Yeah, I want to bring the professor in on this. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. This idea that with the ongoing political strife that is happening in Haiti, that Dominican Republic actually deported a significant number of Haitians back despite what is going on. What's your take on
it? There is this myth about a fatal conflict between Haiti and the Dominican Republic that's gone on for many, many years, and this myth of a conspiracy plan to fusion both countries, and that Haiti is a burden to the Dominican Republic, when in fact that it ties up to this ongoing anti-immigrant ideology that we see in other countries, not only here in the States, where immigrants are perceived as a burden, taking over social services, but that is the argument proposed by a state that is not willing to invest in the social services that it's supposed to provide in terms of education, health care. So it's easier for the government, whether it's in France, in the United States, in the Dominican Republic, to say, oh, we don't have enough room in the schools because Haitians are taking up all the seats away from the Dominican kids. No, how about you invest in building more schools and invest in training more teachers?
Fair enough, but the senator raised an important point, this idea of the availability of resources to be able to take in Haitian,
I
guess
the resources of the Dominican Republic come in a very large part from Haitian labor. In the agricultural industry, the construction industry, especially the construction industry, the tourism industry, all businesses are built on the back of Haitian labor.
Senator, I'm curious to hear what your response will be.
The only way to get resolutions in Haiti is to get the international community to invest more in Haiti. It makes no sense, for example, in this country, where we spend $385 million to help assist Haiti, yet we spend over $4 billion in Ukraine.
But that's
part of the problem.
But is that a fair analysis when you say that the United States is investing in Haiti, given that U.S. imperialism is part of the reason why Haiti is in the case?
I'm not saying they're investing. I'm saying they're not investing enough considered what the results of colonialism. Look, the biggest problem also
but shouldn't that be
the French government still getting paid
for
enough. Haitian freedom.
Right, but shouldn't
insane.
That be a reparations argument for Haiti? In terms of the United States paying reparations for, I think it was approximately 11 years that they occupied Haiti for.
Well, I believe that the United States should invest in Haiti, absolutely, but I'm saying that
investment
invest
versus reparations.
Well, even if you want to call it reparation, right, whatever investment that is required for the 11 years that they're there, it's going to help the island, and they have to develop the infrastructure. We can't give without helping develop the infrastructure so that the Haitian community can, in of itself, resolve their, a lot of the economic issues that they have. But the international community and the French government is at fault, and mostly at fault for what's happening in Haiti. The Dominican Republic is not the problem. The Dominican Republic is part of the solution. And that's what they've been trying to do.
All right, great conversation, but we have to end it there. I want to thank our guests, State Senator Luis Sepúlveda and Professor Sophie Maríñez. I'm Kerry Gashoro, and this is Let It Rip. Before we end, we'd like to highlight some of the black women who made it possible for Kamala Harris to run for president. Specifically, we'd like to talk about Fannie Lou Hamer and Shirley Chisholm. Now, Fannie Lou Hamer became active in the civil rights movement when she began organizing with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Hamer also co-founded the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, which challenged the Mississippi Democratic Party's efforts to block black participation. At the 1964 Democratic National Convention, Hamer's I Question America speech challenged a segregated delegate election process within the Democratic Party. Then there was Shirley Chisholm, who was the first African-American woman in Congress and the first woman and African-American to run for president. Chisholm's campaign slogan, "Unbought and Unbossed," accurately defined how she chose to lead, being clear that she was not beholden to the Democratic Party bosses. Despite facing racist and sexist attacks, which included not being permitted to take part in televised debates, Chisholm's campaign aimed to create a voting coalition that included black, female, poor, and young people. Now, while Chisholm did not win, a presidential run continues to inspire many women, especially black women and other women of color. I'm Kerry Gashoro, and this is Let It Rip. And to stay connected with all the news we're covering, check us out on the CUNY TV app. You don't want to miss this.